You've probably said some version of this to yourself, "I'll be completely honest when it actually matters." But this is just business. Padding an invoice by a few hours. Letting a client believe something that isn't quite true. Cutting a corner nobody will ever trace back to you. Here's the question this video is actually about: what do you do when you are certain, completely certain, that no one is checking? Because that's not a hypothetical. That's every single day you run a business. Maybe it's a discrepancy in a report you send to an investor. Maybe it's a testimonial you'd like to tweak just slightly, because the real one wasn't quite impressive enough. Nobody's going to fact-check it. That's exactly what makes it a test, not of your skill, but of your character. There's a man in the book of Daniel who was put through the most thorough performance review in the Bible, and he didn't even know it was happening. Daniel 6 tells us that King Darius appointed 120 administrators to run the kingdom, with 3 supervisors over them. Daniel was one of the 3. And Daniel 6, verse 3, says he so distinguished himself, by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. That promotion made him a target. Verse 4, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Sit with that for a second. These weren't casual observers. These were rivals, men with every motive to find something, and very likely the authority to actually audit his books. And after however long they looked, the record they came back with was empty. Not mostly clean. Not nothing major. Empty. So they didn't find a financial crime. They had to manufacture a religious one, pressuring the king into a law that made Daniel's private prayer illegal. Verse 10, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, just as he had done before. Read that last phrase again, just as he had done before. Not a defiant new gesture to make a point. The same private habit he'd kept up long before anyone was watching for it. He was thrown into the den of lions for it. And the king, who clearly respected him, said something almost like a prayer himself in verse 16, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Then something easy to skip past, verse 18 says the king went back to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him. And he could not sleep. A pagan king, up all night, worried about the fate of a foreign official, because he already knew, from years of watching Daniel work, exactly what kind of man he'd just been forced to condemn. At first light, Darius ran to the den himself and called out, verse 20, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God been able to rescue you?" And from inside the den, verse 22, "My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight." Verse 23 adds the detail that matters most for us: no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. The men who'd engineered the trap faced the consequences of their own scheme. The scheme collapsed on the people who built it. Daniel's integrity out. Here's what's easy to miss in that story: Daniel's integrity wasn't the plot twist. It was the baseline. It had been true for years before this chapter even starts. The lion's den didn't create his character, it just made it visible. That's the actual lesson for anyone running a business: character isn't what shows up during the crisis. Character is what the crisis reveals. Whatever's true about how you operate when nobody's checking, that's what's actually going to show up when everybody is. Proverbs talks about this constantly, and it doesn't talk about it as abstract virtue. It talks about it as business practice. Proverbs 11 verse 1, "The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him." In an ancient marketplace, a dishonest scale meant a trader kept 2 sets of stone weights, a heavier set for buying grain, a lighter set for selling it, and skimmed a small margin off of every transaction, in a way no single customer would ever catch in the moment. Archaeologists working sites across the ancient Near East have actually recovered sets of weights exactly like this, stones cut to look identical, marked with the same denomination, but deliberately off by a few grams. It wasn't a rare scam. It was common enough that God addresses it repeatedly, not as a footnote, but as a recurring theme across Proverbs, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. Notice what made it work: it was invisible in any single transaction. No customer weighed their own grain against a certified standard. The dishonesty only existed inside the trader's own hands, which is exactly why it required integrity, not oversight, to stop it. Proverbs 10 verse 9 puts the payoff plainly: whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. Not, might be found out. Will be. Maybe not today. But Daniel's story is the proof that the reverse is just as true. When there's genuinely nothing to find, that becomes its own. This isn't just an ancient world problem. In 2018, the outdoor retailer REI was offered a batch of jackets from a supplier at 40% below market price. Good margins, easy decision on paper. Their procurement team looked into why the price was so low, and found the supplier had misclassified its workers to avoid paying them proper benefits, cutting costs by cutting corners on its own employees. REI walked away from the deal. It cost them a cheaper product and a faster restock. Nobody outside that negotiation would ever have known if they'd taken it. Their CEO at the time put it simply: we don't build our business on other people's exploitation. That's Proverbs 11 verse 1 in a 21st century supply chain. The scale was still dishonest, it was just measured in labor instead of silver. Here's a second example, from the opposite angle: not refusing a bad deal, but choosing radical honesty by default. The software company Buffer made an unusual decision: they published their salaries publicly. Every role, every number, visible to anyone. Their founder has said it plainly: that kind of transparency is uncomfortable, but it builds a level of trust that ordinary marketing never could. Buffer's customer retention sits near 98%, which is remarkably high for their industry. Not because transparency is a growth hack. Because when people can see you have nothing to hide in the open, they stop wondering what you're hiding everywhere else. Two different companies, two different decisions, same underlying principle: the accurate weight, chosen even when the dishonest one would have been easier and cheaper. Proverbs 22 verse 1 names exactly what both of them were actually protecting: a good name is more desirable than great riches, to be esteemed is better than silver or gold. Not because reputation is worth more than money in some abstract, sentimental sense, but because reputation is the thing that determines whether the money keeps coming at all. REI's trust with its customers, Buffer's trust with its users, that's the actual asset. The revenue was just what trust looked like once it compounded. So what does this actually look like this week, in your business specifically? It's the invoice you round down instead of up, even though the client would never notice the difference. It's telling a customer the honest limitation of your product instead of letting an exaggeration close the sale. It's paying a contractor on time even when your own cash flow is tight and delaying would be easy to justify. None of these are dramatic. None of them will get audited. That's exactly the point: they're the modern version of the weights in the ancient marketplace. Small, private, and completely up to you. Think about how this shows up in something as ordinary as your own marketing. There's a version of "our software will transform your business" that's exciting and vague, and a version that's smaller and true: "our software automates your invoicing, and most users save 3 to 5 hours a week." The second one will win you fewer clicks. It will also win you clients who stay, because you told them exactly what they were getting before they paid for it. Same with a guarantee. Guaranteed results sound stronger than "we've delivered measurable outcomes for most of our clients, and here's what that actually looked like." But only one of those sentences is a dishonest scale waiting to be discovered. Here's how to actually put this into practice this week, in 3 concrete steps. First, run a quick integrity audit. Pull up your last 10 invoices or client reports. Read them the way a skeptical auditor would. Is there anything rounded in your favor that shouldn't be? Write it down before you decide what to do about it. Second, Pick one decision this week where cutting a corner would be genuinely invisible to everyone but you, and make the honest call anyway. Pay the contractor on time even though your cash flow is tight. Disclose the limitation instead of letting the client assume the best case. Third, say it out loud to someone. Tell a business partner, a spouse, a mentor, what you chose and why. Daniel's integrity was private, but it wasn't secret. The people around him could see the pattern, even the ones trying to find fault with it. Let someone else see yours too. None of these 3 steps will show up on a balance sheet this month. That's not the point. The point is what Daniel wasn't perfect. But when they searched, there was nothing to find. That's not a low bar. It's actually one of the hardest things to build in a business, a track record so consistent that even your rivals come up empty. That's what it means to honor God in your job. Not a slogan on the wall. A ledger that would hold up under an audit nobody ordered. If this was helpful, the next video in this series looks at why rest, not hustle, is the strategy the Bible actually recommends. Subscribe if you want to keep building this with